The president teased the tariffs on semiconductors that could be set as soon as next week. Those tariffs could be between 200% and 300%.
It's bananas, it's berserk, and it's a little bit crazy all at once.
President Trump has declared that tariffs of 200 to 300% on semiconductors are coming within weeks. His goal is direct: push electronics and technology companies to move production to the United States to avoid crushing costs. The plan follows a carrot-and-stick model, with lower rates at first and far higher ones if companies do not build factories on American soil.
I'll be setting tariffs next week and the week after on, I would say, chips. Chips and semiconductors. They don't open here, they have to make, in some cases, 200%, 300%.
This is presented as proof of his promise to bring manufacturing back. Yet behind the rhetoric lies a policy more threatening than practical, lacking a consistent framework that industry can rely on. The timing is especially fraught. US-China relations remain tense, with new threats of tariffs tied to Beijing's purchases of Russian oil. China is still the dominant exporter of rare earths to the United States, which makes Canada's resources even more significant. Some of the minerals essential to chipmaking are tied to Canadian supply, leaving Washington dependent in ways tariffs cannot change.
Okay, well, he actually mentioned a possible exemption for companies that manufacture here in the United States. How would that even work? He keeps saying, come this time next year, all the manufacturing that's going to happen. We see no evidence of any of those plans as of yet.
Bringing complex supply chains home in a single year is not realistic. Semiconductor production depends on infrastructure that takes years to build, from advanced fabrication plants to clean rooms and lithography equipment. It also requires thousands of skilled engineers and technicians, a workforce that cannot simply appear overnight. Most importantly, production hinges on access to raw materials. Critical minerals such as gallium, cobalt, and graphite are still largely imported, and China remains the main source of rare earths for the United States. With Washington and Beijing on opposite sides of key geopolitical disputes, the risk of disruption is high. Tariffs may create headlines, but they do not solve shortages of minerals that are essential to the modern economy. This is where Canada enters the picture. Beyond oil, gas, and uranium, Canada holds reserves of minerals vital to high-tech manufacturing.
David Eby alluded to this critical mineral when outlining how BC could help provide leverage in a tariff battle with President-elect Trump. But why? What's germane about germanium?
If the United States doesn't get this metal from the Teck smelter and trail, it's not available at all.
Germanium stands out. It is a key material in advanced semiconductor production, used to make high-speed chips and optical components that silicon alone cannot deliver. The only major North American supply comes from a smelter in Trail, British Columbia, employing about 1,500 people. Industry analysts call it indispensable for the next generation of electronics and defense technologies. If tensions with China escalate, the value of Canada's resources becomes even clearer. Washington may raise tariffs on Canadian metals or non-USMCA products, but the United States cannot easily replace Canadian germanium or other critical minerals. Ottawa therefore holds a position of leverage that tariffs alone cannot erase. In effect, pressure on Canada risks undermining the very supply chains that America is trying to secure. Canada has not stood still. Rather than rushing into a weak deal, Prime Minister Mark Carney has emphasized patience and rebuilding capacity at home.
We're talking about steel, auto, new sectors of the economy, artificial intelligence, what we're doing in terms of making Canada competitive. Good to see you.
At a meeting with Ontario Premier Doug Ford in Ottawa this August, both leaders highlighted the importance of reinforcing steel, auto, and semiconductor sectors while investing in artificial intelligence. Their approach is to strengthen competitiveness internally, rather than depending on unpredictable decisions in Washington. Support packages for industries affected by U.S. tariffs are being paired with plans to expand critical mineral projects, including more than a dozen developments in British Columbia. These projects, worth tens of billions of Canadian dollars, signal that Canada intends to expand its role as a secure supplier. Far from yielding to American pressure, Ottawa is turning tariffs into an opportunity to accelerate long-term growth. In the end, tariffs of 200 or 300% can grab attention, but factories cannot be built overnight, and essential minerals cannot be conjured at will. Without stable access to resources and cooperation from partners like Canada, the vision of a fully self-sufficient U.S. manufacturing base will remain beyond reach. What is unfolding is not only a tariff battle. It is a contest between political theater and economic reality. And in that contest, Canada holds more leverage than Washington might care to admit.
In a social media post, Trump said, quote, "The August 1st deadline is the August 1st deadline. It stands strong and will not be extended."
President Trump announced a tariff extension for Mexico this morning, posting to social media, "We have agreed to extend for a 90-day period."
On July 31st, the White House stood firm. No country would get an extension. August 1st was the final cutoff. That's what the world was told. No delays, no exceptions. The U.S. would begin slapping 35% tariffs on goods from any nation that hadn't signed a new trade deal. But hours before the deadline, Trump changed his mind. Mexico got a 90-day extension. Canada didn't. This wasn't a small footnote. It revealed something deeper about how Trump's trade strategy is playing out and who it's really targeting.
Mexico is a very unique situation of all the other countries around the world because, of course, we share our southern border with Mexico.
The administration had spent weeks repeating that there would be no further delays. The tariffs were set in motion months ago and had already been pushed back once, from April to August. Officials said publicly that countries had time and the deadline would be enforced. But just before midnight, Trump suddenly spared Mexico. The reason? According to his spokesperson, Mexico is a unique case because of its shared southern border and recent cooperation on stopping drug and human trafficking. That framing sounds logical at first, but when Canada is brought into the picture, the logic starts to unravel. Canada also shares a long land border with the United States, over 5,500 miles, the longest undefended border in the world. The two countries are deeply tied through CUSMA, which still governs the majority of their trade. So why didn't Canada get the same 90-day grace period? Trump's team didn't offer a clear answer. What's clear, though, is that Canada wasn't even in the running for an exemption. Instead, the White House seemed focused on escalation. Just hours before tariffs took effect, Trump cited issues far outside trade, like Canada's recent recognition of Palestine, as a reason for breakdowns in negotiations. It had nothing to do with customs or commerce, and everything to do with politics. This wasn't about trade strategy, it was pressure politics, plain and simple. The same playbook Trump used on Brazil. Trump's decision to exempt Mexico wasn't rooted in a broader policy shift. It was a political calculation. While the administration framed it as a border issue, that logic crumbles under scrutiny. The U.S. has critical economic and security ties with Canada too, especially in energy. Canada supplies over 4 million barrels of oil per day to the U.S., according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, making it America's top foreign energy source by far. Yet no exemption was offered. The real difference? Mexico agreed not to retaliate. Canada didn't. Prime Minister Mark Carney continued negotiations but refused to rush into a lopsided deal. And in Trump's world, standing firm doesn't earn you more time, it earns you a target.
Well, they have to pay a fair rate. It's all. It's very simple. They have been charging very, very high tariffs to our farmers. Farmers very badly. They've been treating our country very badly for years. And look, we like Canada. I love Canada. I have so many friends in Canada. But they've been very poorly led.
Despite the pressure, Canada didn't blink. Trump's move may have been designed to trigger panic in Ottawa, but it didn't. Officials stayed the course. No public outburst, no rushed announcement, no last-minute signature. While Mexico's deal is still undefined and its exemptions temporary, Canada is choosing clarity over chaos. Economists from multiple Canadian outlets have pointed out that over 80% of Canadian exports still flow tariff-free under CUSMA. That buys time, and more importantly, it gives leverage.
This guy will say something one day, and he'll wake up, and the cheese slips off the cracker, and then all of a sudden he goes the other way. And you're thinking, how do you deal with a guy like this?
What we saw on August 1st wasn't a rulebook being followed. It was one man's playbook, where deadlines bend, allies are tested, and pressure is personal. Trump gave Mexico more time because it fit his optics. He denied Canada that same time because Ottawa didn't fold. But trade isn't just about theater. And Canada's refusal to rush shows that it understands that. In the end, that calm might prove to be its strongest move yet.
They call it pink gold. Potash is a vital ingredient for growing food in Canada production volume. It's now being touted as a secret weapon in this trade war with the United States.
The countdown is on. Canada and the United States are deep in trade talks, facing a hard deadline, August 1st. If no deal is reached, President Trump has vowed to impose a sweeping 35% tariff on Canadian imports. It's not just a threat, it's already been formalized in writing. Behind closed doors, Prime Minister Mark Carney is walking a tightrope. On one side, Canada's economy, still heavily tied to the US market. On the other, a US president who's turned tariffs into a political weapon. Carney's strategy has been quiet but deliberate. He's paused Canada's digital services tax, offered symbolic defense cooperation through the US Missile Shield program, and tried to avoid any public confrontation. But now, many in Canada believe that's not enough. They say it's time to put real pressure on Trump, and one word keeps coming up: potash.
Gulf Islands Member of Parliament Elizabeth May, she's calling on Carney to continue collecting the digital sales tax. She's also pitching stopping the $4.9 billion exportation of Canadian potash, a key ingredient for fertilizer to American farmers.
Potash is a key ingredient in fertilizer. Without it, global food production would shrink dramatically. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, over 50% of the world's food supply depends on fertilizers, and potash provides the potassium that makes them effective. Canada holds the largest reserves of potash on the planet, with most production centered in Saskatchewan. The United States, by contrast, produced only around 400,000 metric tons of potash in 2023, while consuming more than 5.3 million tons. The numbers speak for themselves. The US depends on Canadian potash, and that makes it different from other traded goods. Cars, aluminum, even semiconductors can be sourced elsewhere. But with Russia and Belarus, the two other major global suppliers, facing sanctions or instability, Canada is essentially the only reliable source left. Any disruption could push fertilizer prices up, and with it, the cost of food across North America. That's why some Canadian leaders are calling for action. They want the federal government to put potash on the negotiating table, not just as a commodity, but as a bargaining chip. One proposal includes halting the $4.9 billion in potash exports to the US entirely. Another suggests creating a national strategic reserve supported by public investment through bonds, an idea costed by Canada's Parliamentary Budget Office during the 2025 federal election. Their logic is simple. If Trump is using pain as leverage, Canada should do the same. And if that pain touches US farmers, one of Trump's most loyal constituencies, it may force a recalibration in Washington.
But the simple logic is, if the price of the fertilizer goes up that much,
yeah, food prices go up.
Everything goes up, and it's food.
There's a risk in weaponizing potash. It's not just another industrial input. It's tied directly to food supply, inflation, and food security. Disrupting potash shipments could hurt not only US farmers but ripple through the global economy. Industry leaders in Saskatchewan warn that tariffs and trade barriers on potash are different. Unlike cars or steel, potash is not optional. It's essential. That's why some argue Canada doesn't need to issue threats. The numbers alone, the dependency, the market imbalance, are powerful enough. The mere possibility of disruption may be all the leverage Canada needs. Trump thrives on confrontation. He pushes hard, expecting others to blink. But this time, he may have met a different kind of resistance. Not loud, not angry, but strategic. Potash isn't just Canada's economic strength. It's America's agricultural lifeline. Whether Canada uses it openly or quietly, it may be the one card strong enough to bring Trump back to the table. Not with bluster, but with a deal.